Yeah, thank you for introduction, Mauno. I'm happy to be here in this tiny but hopefully really interested community, and hopefully more people joining in online. My talk today is about one of the projects which I have curated quite recently. And it is about different formats of engaging with everyday life through arts and culture. Actually, I will be talking about Urban Art Laboratory as a format which actually joins education as well as performative and reflexive practice in understanding and reconceptualizing the urban space. So I will start and just briefly to share my opinion or my view on what an urban art laboratory is. Well, based on literature and the experiences of my colleagues in arts and culture, I understand an urban art laboratory as a multidisciplinary format, which actually combines two branches of knowledge, this being urban studies and artistic approaches to the city. And the city is an urban space, is sort of an object in this endeavor. So in a way, this is a format to practice urban space, to view it, to hear it, to engage with it through bridging these two spaces of knowledge. And at the same time to produce certain artifacts or products which can give the vision, a new vision on what an urban space is. And a laboratory as a format is quite widespread in both of the fields, in urban art, in urban studies and in arts, and in urban art as well, because it is a format which presupposes interaction and engagement, and also allows to unite into groups, into multidisciplinary groups of participants who are actually receiving this experience. In Russia, this format has become quite popular recently, and I will be talking of one of the cases here, which took place in St. Petersburg. Before starting to describe the case, I would like to refer to certain literature, which actually makes up a theoretical framework for these kinds of practices. Me personally and my colleagues are basing pretty much on French critical theory of the city and of urban space. And you see here the main representatives, starting, of course, with Henri Lefebvre and his claim for the revolutionizing of everyday life, and argument that actually arts and culture are those resources which provide us with new visions and which can help us to rethink those routines in everyday life, which are actually ascribed to us by the capitalistic mechanisms, for example, by the mechanism of consumption. And of course, the idea here is to avoid these capitalistic formats and to engage with the space, not through the consumption, but through new formats of vision or listening to it or giving it some feedback. Another important philosopher here is, of course, Guy Debord, and aside from his theoretical points of view, he's also giving us an important tool for engaging with everyday life and the city space. This is, of course, the psychogeography and the alternative walks in the city, which allow to experience it through atmospheres, through emotional parts of it, avoiding official representations, for example, official maps which structure the city in a certain way, and to look for those spaces which are underrepresented in the official discourse, but make up certain milieus for interesting groups, people, interesting social scenarios, those scenarios which seem to be marginal or even delinquent in official discourse. Another philosopher here is Michel de Certeau, who is focusing our attention on the tactics with which we can practice the everyday space. And he is talking that those tactics, contrary to the strategies ascribed by the city administration or those in power, they are, of course, tiny, small, and non-visible, but actually they present this a space of freedom. Because when walking in the city, again, walking is really important, especially walking in a spontaneous way. When walking in the city, those people who are choosing their routes, they can actually rethink and rewrite the urban text. And other sorts of tactics are also welcome, such as, for example, playing in the streets. And games was also, as an instrument, really important for Henri Lefebvre. And of course, Marc Augé, who is dwelling on the concept of a non-space. For him, non-spaces being places with those neutral identity spaces which are neutrally designed, such as airports or trade centers, but also if widening up this concept, non-spaces could be named as places which have lost their identity, again, through this anonymity of capitalistic consumption of space, for example. Pretty often we know the situations when our students or ourselves even do not know the story of the street. We know a trade center situated there or a transportation stop, but we do not know the people who have been living there or those scenarios which are happening behind the facade. So this theory is really important to conceptualize what an urban laboratory could be and what it could intake in terms of conceptual field and also in terms of practices. So referring to the case of Urban Art Lab in St. Petersburg, I'm presenting here brief information. It was called 25 Lines. On a map, you're seeing a part of our city, Vasilisk Island, which is really an island in the central part of the city, of the main body of the city. And this island was designed by urban planners, firstly as so the island was divided into the lines, not the streets, but the lines which were meant to be channels, water channels filled with water. They were not eventually, but the lines left their names. So we were working those lines, not all of them, but 25, and we were calling it a story of Vasilisk Island. So eventually each line was worked with, and eventually an artifact was dedicated to each of the lines, an artifact which in a certain way represented another story of this line. So this lab was happening this end of last year and beginning of this year for several months, and it united different kinds of people, participants who were presenting really different kinds of backgrounds. For example, those people who are already engaged into urban studies, urban planning, like urban sociologists, anthropologists, architects, urban designers. And from another point of view, well, from another side, sorry, these were people already engaged with arts. Mostly of these were performers, people representing the new theater. So the post theater, as it is called, so different kinds of performative practices taking place not on official scene of theaters, but for example in the city space. And this was a really interesting combination because this was an exchange of knowledges and practices already gained, and also new creation of certain optics, which participants were receiving from us as curators and also developing themselves. There were 3 curators in this urban art lab, which is also quite important. Myself, I was leading the track on urban sociology and on urban approaches as such. And 2 other curators, one of them was creating the performative track, and the third one was creating the cultural management story in that, bringing it all together as a producer. So this is a brief background, and also in the photographs you see the screen, the insights into the working process. We had a space where we worked, and it was situated on one of the lines on this island. And in this space, we were having the program, lectures, workshops. And out of this space, people were going outside and working and experiencing the lines around this space. Also, just few photos to show you this Vasilisk Island body of phenomena. It is really beautifully planned. And here on the left, you see the most important architectural part of it, which is oriented towards the center with this beautiful architectural ensemble. And really, mostly the morphology of and the types of buildings and the architecture is historical with classical architecture, but the real life is happening, of course, and the lines are consumed differently. For example, different kinds of signs appear there, which relate to contemporary services and contemporary infrastructures in the space. But the island is, in a way, piece of land with its own identity, and it's evident that people living on an island really have this island identity. So they perceive themselves as a certain community, and sometimes they do not leave the island to go outside for some new practices or new services, and they try to have it all here. And many much of the cultural capital is linked with this city space, and this plot, for example, numerous poetry by famous Russian poets like Joseph Brodsky were writing about this island as a really important, symbolically important part of the city. But the recent story of an island is quite vague, so it is not understandable as such, the discourse of it. So in this context, the participants were led through a certain process, and you see the agenda on the screen. we were reading together theoretical texts, and we were discussing texts by those researchers I've presented already, and some more. And this theory part, it was on the first first weeks of our workshop. And also there were different research practices. I would say these were art and research practices, because these were different performative walks, for example, and at the same time, this could be different kinds of mapping of urban space elements, which came as a research technique from urban studies. And after these first weeks and first month, the design process started, and participants were processing all of those data they have been working with and collecting, and they were choosing one of the urban issues to work with in a more artistic format. And afterwards, they were creating a certain artifact which was dedicated to one of the lines. So the participants were divided into microgroup, and each of the microgroup was working with one of the lines of Vasilisk Island. And in the end, we have made an exhibition which was presenting those artifacts together in one space. As for their optics, I really assume this an important merge and really good thing in the laboratory, because we were able to connect together different kinds of research techniques. I would call them the techniques which give us different kinds of optics. As I said, different kinds of mappings were used, like emotional mapping or mental mapping, or rhythm analysis after Henri Lefebvre. And from the art side, these were different kinds of performative walks and dances, critical photography, techniques of working with found art objects. So you see on the photographs a bit of this engagement with the city. When you see certain kinds of details, you tackle them as traces of certain practices, and you try to decipher them. Or you are collecting different kinds of images, or you are collecting different sounds and voices of people. And also, it is important that in our research, well, in design, we were asking participants to work a lot with people living in the lines and walking the lines. So this could be really quite participatory, and this could lead participants to revealing the hidden voices. So after those practices, the participants have arrived to certain results in terms of revealing different kinds of urban issues, and then they were picking up a certain technique, artistic technique, to work with those issues. For example, some of them arrived to an issue of exclusion of certain social groups from the urban design of the line. So actually, an example can be that one of the groups was working with adolescents, kids and adolescents who are living or socializing on one of the lines. And they were working with them in the regime of certain interviewing or brief interviewing or brief conversations and let's say engagement with them and their kinds of practices. And at the same time, they were deciphering that actually the kids are not having their own space on the line, but they actually need this space. So the adolescents are not smaller kids, and adolescents and spots for adolescents, or like playgrounds for adolescents, are really absent in the urban design in St. Petersburg. And adolescents are hardly left out of the city space as such. So the places they can be in are the trade centers, for example, or the streets really, where they try to find themselves a place. And after working with those kids, the group actually has chosen itself a strategy of this rethinking or representing of this issue. And of course, the strategy was in voicing up those voices, those hidden voices, in a written dialogue represented on the artifact, and also in the sound installation, also represented through the audio, well, the sound artifact. And as you see, there were a number of other issues which were uncovered, and this is really important that those issues were tackled with different kinds of strategies. So these were the, let's say, urbanistic kinds of activities like interviewing, yes, mapping, and at the same time, there was a lot of arts in that. Those other issues, well, I think there can be found in other cities as well. Unfortunately, many of them appear to be in Russian cities due to, let's say, non-strategical urban planning and exclusion of public from urban planning. We have only started talking about public participation in urban planning, and this is important for understanding the kind of the context. And of course, the Urban Art Laboratory has really shown that this is a topical issue on bringing back the public and the voices of the social groups into this conversation. And you also see the list of the strategies which can actually show these urban issues not in a scientific way, but in an artistic way. So voicing and creating alternative designs and gamification or creative interaction in situations are really giving us more space for the message. So, for example, on the photos, you see on the upper photo an installation where the main design, this big photo, was taken and then collaged in a way to show how the artists wanted to brighten up the city space, because all of those red and blue colors are, of course, painted on a photograph, and how they wanted to, let's say, give a vision on these different items which people would like to see. It was a bit ironic as well, because a lot of people associate good urban design with fountains and benches. Of course, this is not really good in terms of contemporary urban design. But again, this was an artistic representation of those hidden wishes, and well, one bigger wish to brighten up the scene, which is really quite dull, and at the same time, irony of artists towards the classical approach in urban beautification, that a fountain and a bench are promoted as really good items of good urban design, which is, of course, not, as we understand, as people knowing things about placemaking. I also wanted to say that the everyday life really gives us a lot of resources, which could be used for creating the artifacts or those different installations and other kinds of representations of the urban space. These are different kinds of materials. For example, even materials taken from the street, like found objects, could represent the life which is happening on the street. This could be sounds, this could be traces, this could be rituals which can be observed which might seem obscure. For example, strange ritual interactions between some lady and some other guy who is working the streets, cleaning it up. But when you see those rituals, when you really observe them, you understand how the life is made. And afterwards, you can picture this ritual or write about it through a written form, and you can really make an accent that this ritual is really happening there. Objects, colors, and even layouts, and of course narratives, are also taken into this arsenal by an artist / urban researcher, and different kinds of forms can appear. So here you see the forms of those artifacts which were made eventually after those process, and they are really different. So from video art to maquette, these were like installations, quite typical, let's say, when an installation has some photo representation. But again, this was not an official representation of the street, but mostly those photographs which were taken by the participants of the lab, they were representing their personal experiences of engagement. For example, those items of the scene, of the urban scene, which made them emotional, which were really important for their vision, which were which gave a certain wow effect. And not a wow in terms of architectural dominant, but a wow in terms of some strange or absurd or weird thing. These were sometimes things which have redescribed or given a certain different vision on the texts appearing on the walls. For example, on this photograph with a black frame, which is in Russian, but it says information. It is actually board with announcements, and they were different announcements on the board appearing here, put there by an artist, which were written in a different form. For example, about need for socializing or for more contact with other people, or need to share things with the neighbors. So this was a rethinking of a traditional format of an information board, which is also quite strange in contemporary digital circumstances. So this was bringing up this format of informational exchange between the neighbors, and also representing those needs which are actually hidden. For example, this need for socializing, and which are unfortunately present in the anonymity of the contemporary city. These were diaries, objects, installations, many kinds of things. And again, another part of it, which goes like hand in hand with the form, is the conceptual side. So the participants or the microgroups working with each of the lines, they were writing their different, all of them were writing little texts, curatorial texts, which were describing the optics and the ideas and the experiences and the answers to the questions they were giving. So each of the line, which was actually represented as a field of questions, a field of issues, a field of different experiences, and the artifact was a way to answer that and also to represent those experiences. And in the conceptual side, in this word cloud, you see that quite a lot of terms are dealing with the alternative optics or identity issues, or the concept of community, the concept of sense. Well, I would unite all of those concepts with the really frame of this critical vision towards the city space, which is promoted by the theorists. Of course, this conceptual field was inspired by the literature participants read, but really the participants made those concepts working, and they found places for them. This is the overview on the eventual exhibition. Unfortunately, it was made inside, not outside, because it was winter time, but it was made in the place where we were working and on a line on Vasilisk Island. And in a way, when those artifacts were put together inside of that space, I think that the exhibition itself made up a really interesting phenomena. It was a certain reenactment of urban space of Vasilisk Island, those insides which were presenting different lines, which were uncovering different kinds of issues of the everyday life, and giving space to see the practices, to hear voices, to see the visions, to really focus on different kinds of visual elements, and again to ask questions about what is the city and what is this line about and how I am perceiving it. And this is, of course, a place where a momentum where the visitors, together with the authors, are in a dialogue and are producing a certain narrative, and where the exhibition as such, as a space, is really sort of an alternative Vasilisk Island, which is really important to have, because, as I said previously, the contemporary discourse on an island is not that well framed. It is really fragmented. No one understands what is a Vasilisk Island today, what it means to people, what it has to be, maybe in terms of an urban marketing strategy. So I think that Urban Art Laboratory really gives space to somehow revive and actualize different kinds of senses in us, and really to use those senses to understand different elements of the landscape, of the surrounding landscape, and to focus on different details, and eventually to create new narratives, which could be then taken from arts, for example, into a more practical field of urban marketing or of urban design or of urban planning. So this will be the end of my presentation. Hopefully I have not taken that much time.
Thank you, Alexandra. This was a fascinating process that you were describing, and your work is very intriguing. We are a bit behind the schedule. Time for one quick question, if can. Yes. Anyone has a question, please make a note to the chat.
Or I can answer afterwards. Yes.
Okay. I just wonder one question. I was wondering about the interaction that you had in the process was mostly face to face.
Yes, it was face to face, and this was, of course, in those circumstances which all of us understand and share. But they were all of the measures of safety taken, and also at that time, at that specific time, they were certain, we'll say the restrictions were lowered in St. Petersburg. Some of them were taken, but yes, this was again quite tough. I think that it is important that we were really working in micro groups and working a lot in outer urban space, so that not only inside the room but also outside, which helped us to follow those restrictions and rules of safety.
Did you get feedback from the inhabitants about the exhibition?
Yes, this is an important thing. As I said, a lot of micro teams, participants, and us were working with the inhabitants, and they were also invited to the exhibition, and some of them really came, and some of them were contacted in the digital form. So for some of the neighboring associations which have their online communities in social media, they were seeing the process online because, well, again, for certain reasons, it was difficult for them to come, or not acceptable for example, people of elderly ages. And this is the point where the format of urban art laboratory could be really strengthened, because more and more participation could be introduced into the format. And it was like the first take, and it could be really made more interactory well, there could be more interaction in terms of showing the results to the inhabitants. If, for example, we were doing something out of the space if it were a warmer season, and if it were the continuation of the project. But as for now, as for this project, I described to you the circumstances in which we dealt.